All right. Good morning, everybody. I know we have some people still filtering into the room. This workshop is the Financial Aid and Managing College Costs workshop as part of College and Career Pathways 2022. We're certainly happy to have you here with us. My name is Carrie Harlow, and I work with VSAC's Career and Education Outreach Program. I've been working with the Talent Search Grant for a long time. And I've been helping families file FAFSAs for more than 20 years. So I'm hoping to share some expertise with you today. Also, I'm the parent of a college senior. So we have been going through this process that you're about to embark on. Joining me today is Matt Beagle-Borgo, and Matt also has a wealth of experience with helping families with the financial aid process, and he has even done this presentation a number of times before. So if you have questions during the presentation, we're going to pause a couple of times to answer questions during the presentation. He may answer some in the Q&A section, and we'll try to get those questions answered. Some will be answered by Matt, but some will also, he'll bring those up to me, and maybe we'll answer if we think that those would be helpful for everybody.
Harry, there's a comment in here asking if you can turn your microphone up. So I don't know if.
Okay, well, let me see if I can do that. Okay, let's see. I don't know if that helped or not.
Someone else is saying you sound good, so go for it. If anyone feels like they can't hear, then just pop a message in there again, and we'll try again.
Okay, great. So to get started, I just want to acknowledge, that this whole idea about paying for college, paying for post-secondary education, can be somewhat overwhelming. And sometimes people feel a bit overwhelmed about how they're going to just tackle this. This presentation's intended to provide a general overview about the idea of paying for college and the role that families play, and maybe some good resources for you to use in this process, as well as options that you might have. We acknowledge that this presentation can't cover everything. So I want to just say we have a bunch of resources available that you can explore on our website. And also that Federal Student Aid has a wealth of information on their website. YouTube, Federal Student Aid, and VSAC have a lot of videos that you can check out. And we also do a number of presentations during the course of the year to help families with this process. So this is not a one-time thing, definitely. And so as questions come up, please use the Q&A, and that will be the way that we can answer questions. As I mentioned, Matt will be answering some of the questions in the Q&A, but he'll also be bringing some up to me, and I'll be pausing during the presentation to answer those. If it looks like we're running out of time, I have a lot of information to share with you, so I might hold on the questions for a bit and then try to get through the information, because you may have questions about things that we're going to cover shortly, I hope. So the key to success in this process really is communication. So about plans, so the student and parent involvement in this college search and selection process. If you're an independent student and you have a spouse, certainly communication about this process is really important. Along with counselors, teachers, or advisors, coming up with good college matches that meet expectations like distance from home, programs offered, housing, placement rates. Research really involves finding out about the true costs. We're going to talk about net price during this presentation, as well as other things like acceptance of AP or college credit. What's really great is when everyone is on the same page from the start. But it's highly likely that family and students have different and unspoken expectations in this process, like whose responsibility it is to find schools to apply to, like completing steps in the process, and whose primary responsibility it is to come up with funds to help pay. I heard a story once of someone who said, that their spouse and them really thought that, their child had a responsibility for paying for college, and that they were going to help him out to the extent that they were able. And they quickly found out that their child thought that it was the parents who were going to be responsible for paying for college, and he was going to help out to the extent that he was able. So in these cases, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And also thinking about who will have what roles in this process and to what extent can we help each other out. So how much can we afford? And really, does someone have veto power in this process? Talking through all these thoughts and expectations in advance can help families to focus on good college matches. And also doing the research helps families to make informed decisions that aren't only well thought out, but also financially sound. And so one of my colleagues had a great recommendation that I ended up implementing when my son was in the process of looking at colleges. And we would set aside time 1 day a week where we would definitely talk about college. And there may be times that he didn't want to talk about the application process, but we had this standing date each week on Sunday afternoon where we would be talking about those sorts of things. And so, not to say that that's something you need to do, but it might be helpful to have that expectation set up and to be talking about it from the beginning. So this is probably one of the scarier slides in this presentation, talking about the cost of attendance at college. You know, this assumes a full-time student with a full cost of attendance. Cost of attendance includes not only tuition and fees, but living on campus. So room costs, meal plan costs, as well as non-billable costs like books, supplies, transportation, personal expenses. And the all years figure assumes no increases in costs year over year. You know, the idea here is to really let you know that the college's advertised price, or their, you know, you could almost call it their sticker price. It's to acknowledge that what you hear about college is not totally exaggerated, but it also lets you know that college costs vary quite a bit. Every college or trade career school has a price, and you can see how it could potentially add up. I want to just mention in the cases that we've got on this slide, the most expensive college, UVM, and the Vermont State College also includes the living on campus cost. But for CCV and the Vermont Trade School, it's the cost listed for a student who lives at home with their parents. And so it includes the cost of commuting, like gas from home, books and supplies, some personal expenses, but no room or board, no room or meal plan costs. CCV, for example, uses a higher cost of attendance than just tuition and fees and a book allowance. That would be closer to maybe $9,500 a year for an in-state student commuting from home. And for families making less than $50,000, CCV has a new scholarship this year, which we'll talk a little bit about. And for the trade school, the tuition fees and mandatory supplies and books, it's closer to $26,500 for a student commuting from home and living with their parents. But the fact is that the cost of attendance is the thing that gets the most press, but the real price that you want to be concerned about is what each student or family has to pay after the financial aid is factored in. And so there is this thing, I'm going to introduce you to this term if you haven't heard it before, called the net price. And the net price is the average of the costs that students had to pay in the previous year after grants and scholarships, the free money basically, were applied. And so these net price are averages for all students attending. So some students and their families are paying more and some are paying less. But the point really is to show you an example of how the cost of attendance is not what people pay on average. And if you visit some of those most expensive colleges, that is one of the first things they will say to you when you ask them about the price. They'll say, oh, most of the people who go here don't pay that. So remember that the net price is the cost of the college minus the free money. It's not including things like loans. And these net price figures don't include work study either, which we'll talk about. I wanted to mention that there's a number of trade or career schools that are eligible for federal financial aid and state financial aid. And two examples here in Vermont are the Advanced Welding Institute and O'Brien's Training Institute. Or I think that sometimes people don't realize that there are some trade schools that are also eligible for federal student aid. And when we talk about colleges during this presentation, we're also going to talk about schools that are eligible for federal student aid, which could include those trade schools. In addition, there's many non-federal aid eligible programs in Vermont. So they're not eligible for federal student aid, but we have this thing called the Vermont Advancement Grant through VSAC. It's funded by the state legislature. And these grants are based on a student's financial need. They don't follow the same process we're talking about today, but I want you to know that there's money out there to pay for trade programs that are not eligible for federal student aid. So there's more information on our website under Pay for College or Training. Choose grants, and it's one of the last grants listed, but there's more information about those programs. A great resource that I'm going to introduce you to right now is this thing called the College Scorecard. It's a website managed by the U.S. Department of Education, as you can see right on it. It's a place to find colleges either by searching for a specific college name or using a search where you can do by distance or degrees offered or majors. There's going to be a link to this web page on the handout, and that you can see electronically. I think it's attached. So there's in-depth information about admissions, graduation rates, placement, median salaries of recent graduates, and the average net cost. The average net cost on the College Scorecard is actually broken down into family income bands, so it might get a little bit more specific for you. But in addition, there are links to college-specific net price calculators from this site, and that's where you can input more specific personal information about the student's grades, standardized test scores, family financial information, and you can see the averages of what students like them had for a net price in a previous year. So it gets a lot more close, a lot more targeted to your student. Now, the important thing that I want to point out here is for state-supported institutions like state colleges and universities, the net price listed on the scorecard is the net price for in-state students only. So for Vermont schools, if you're looking at those, that's fine. But if you're looking at, Georgia Institute of Technology, that is a state-supported school. And so you want to make certain that you go to their net price calculator to see what a net price for a student from Vermont would be. Another thing you can find on this college scorecard, and I just want to point this out to you, is median salary information by major after graduation, as well as median federal debt by major. And this is helpful because one guideline that's recommended is that students not borrow cumulatively for college more than they can reasonably expect to make their first year out. I'll say that again. The guideline is that students should not borrow more cumulatively for college than they can reasonably expect to make their first year out. So the college scorecard for students who know what they want to major in can help you with that. And in addition to the college scorecard, another site you may have heard of is called College Navigator. I just want to mention it. It has similar information, but also tabs to find out information about campus safety, student demographics, as well as accreditation. So there's more information out there. Beagle, do we have some questions?
There was one question I answered in chat about net price. So you can look there for that, folks. There is one question that I think you'll address later is to make sure you address the CSS profile and what that is. So define that and how it's different than the FAFSA.
Perfect. It's coming up. Thank you. Stay tuned. So this is probably the second scariest slide in this whole presentation. I like to warn people in advance. But basically, the responsibility for paying for college does fall to the family. For dependent students in this process, parents and students should work together to develop a plan for paying and financing both in the short term, the first year, but also the long term, 2 years or 4 years. When we talk about independent students and we say the family, if the independent student is married, that is part of their family. And so that is part of that, that thought with that philosophy. But regarding common thoughts when families hear this, the family has the primary responsibility. It doesn't necessarily mean that the family has to pull out their checkbook and write a check for the cost of attendance. We already know about net price, right? But need-based financial aid will look at family resources first, and then they'll supplement but not replace what's determined to be the family contribution. That's the need-based financial aid. It's also the family responsibility to meet deadlines, to file the necessary forms, to respond to requests for additional information. School counselors, VSAC, and college financial aid staff, we are all here to help, but ultimately the family's responsible for getting this completed. And so another communication topic for the student and family is who has responsibility for this? Colleges will be communicating with the student. So how will the student share those requests? And where will you keep track of this information? Those are all things to be considered when you're thinking about this process. So let's talk about the different types of financial aid. Grants are free money, usually based on a student's financial need. Scholarships are also free money. They're sometimes based on grades or a student's talent or ability, maybe based on an audition or a portfolio or athletics or community service or leadership. And scholarships might be awarded by a college as part of the admissions process without even knowing a student's financial need. There are also other scholarships that students can apply through, for instance, through VSAC or through their local community. We have a scholarships workshop coming up shortly, and I hope you'll be planning on attending or viewing that after. With work study, students are deemed to be eligible to work and earn money toward personal expenses at school. Generally, work study is not paid toward a student's bill unless a student chooses to take that check when they get their paycheck and walk that to the Student Financial Services office. It doesn't guarantee a job or earnings. When a student gets awarded financial aid, the student then finds a job, works the hours, and then they get paid. The financial aid part of work study is that the federal government actually pays the college money to help pay the students for work study so that students have another source of financial aid. And loans, just like they sound, loans are borrowed money to help pay for educational costs. They could be loans for the student, for the parents, and those involve interest rates as well as repayment terms. And let's get to the financial aid applications to submit. So please remember, even though you may have determined your net price by using the net price calculator at a college, you still have to apply in order to be eligible for financial aid. And there's a number of applications that students might need to fill out. The applications really serve as a starting point for colleges and agencies to identify your ability to pay. And there's several applications that you'll need to complete. So the FAFSA is the primary form for applying for financial aid. And that is one that most students will complete. Additionally, the Vermont grant application, the Vermont grant is available for Vermont students to help pay for post-secondary education costs. And there is an application that students have to apply for that. Here's the question about the CSS profile. Colleges will have their own financial aid forms that students have to complete, and the CSS profile is one of those forms. It's probably the most widely used one. And you want to check with a college financial aid office as to whether that form is required, because it's not required for all schools. Generally, the colleges that require the CSS profile are the schools that are more expensive and have more financial aid at stake. They are asking additional questions to what's asked on the FAFSA. They would like to get deeper into the student and family financial situation. Scholarship applications are another form that students will be filling out. They'll be filling out a number of those, hopefully, to look for free money for college. And then loan applications, many students and many families will be filling out loan applications as part of this process. But I should mention that the loan applications, that's one of the last steps. It really happens after the student has been accepted to a college, has been awarded financial aid, and then knows how much they still need in order to pay for college. So that tends to be something, those loan applications tend to be something that happens generally right around high school graduation time, or for college students who are already enrolled, that might happen toward the end of that college academic year for the next year. So when do students apply? The first piece of this process is this thing called an FSA ID or a FAFSA account. And so every student applying for federal aid has to create that account. And one parent of any dependent student also has to create their own FSA ID account. If a parent had an account before for an older child, they continue to reuse their account. Your account is yours to you, it's personal. But the student will need their own. So you may have had an older student apply for an FSA ID. Each student needs their own. These take a little bit more time to set up, but the more security equals more questions, but it also gives you more opportunities if you forget that FSA ID in order to retrieve that information. So it's worthwhile to get all this done. Students should use a non-school email address. And the reason why the students should use a non-school email address is because many high schools in Vermont will turn off your email address when you graduate. And you are going to need this account into and beyond your college education, because you'll also use it to keep track of your federal student loans. So you want to create a free address that you can use that's college and scholarship appropriate. And students can do that now. But we recommend usually a few days a week before you apply, file your FAFSA, you can sign up for that FSA ID. So Let's talk about the FAFSA, because that is the primary, it's the main financial aid form. It gathers both parent and student financial information for dependent students. For independent students, it's the student whose information is on that. There's income information, both taxable and untaxed, assets, family size, number of college, and age of the older parent for dependent students. For the class of 2023, so that's juniors, the FAFSA, first FAFSA will be available October 1st, 2022. There is a FAFSA online right now, but it's not for the right school year for current high school juniors. They want to use the 2023-2024 version. That's going to be the year that the student's in college. There will be 2 years on because some students will be applying for financial aid for the spring of 2023, and that's actually a different FAFSA. So you want to make sure you choose the right one. You want to make sure to check college deadlines, and really important because the college deadline, a lot of times if a college is citing a deadline for their financial aid applications, what they're saying is that they will look at the students who applied on time first, and they will consider the students who didn't apply on time for whatever is left over. So it's really important to meet the earliest college deadline that you have. But you can also add colleges later. If the student has to apply early and they didn't know all the schools they were applying to, you can log into that filed FAFSA and then add more schools. That is a possibility. And also there's a mobile app. I just wanted to mention that because we are doing so much on our phones these days. The mobile app is also available for federal student aid, and you can file your FAFSA on your phone if you want to. So let's talk also about the Vermont grant. That is available the same day as the FAFSA. So high school juniors will be eligible to file their first Vermont grant application on October 1st of 2022. Again, they want to make sure they have the right year. And on the Vermont grant application, it actually says, stop, are you applying for the right year? It stops people in their tracks, but it makes you double check. You want the year that the student will be in college that you're applying for. And you will file a FAFSA every year that the student wants money for financial aid, and the Vermont grant can be filed each year too. It is required, the Vermont grant application is required for state grant aid. There will be colleges that on their award letter will estimate a Vermont grant. You will not be eligible for that grant unless you apply. Check your status online and make sure to complete the to-do list. So if there's additional information requested, you need to complete that in order to be eligible for the Vermont grant. And finally, you can fill out forms online. You can upload documents. So that's available to be done all online. And students have to create their own My VSAC account before they apply for the Vermont grant. Usually Vermont has about $19 to $20 million available a year in grants for Vermont students. And the Vermont grant is also fully portable. Students, if they're eligible for a Vermont grant, can use their funding both in Vermont as well as for colleges outside of Vermont.
Carrie, there's a question before you move on from the grant. Someone asked about early college. So if a student is in high school doing early college,
yes.
How does that apply to them?
Sure. So there is actually Vermont grant money available based on financial need for students who are involved in early college. And so if they are planning on starting early college in the fall of 22 this year, they can be filing a FAFSA and Vermont grant application right now to be eligible for that money. The amount, if a student's eligible, is $1,000. It works out to $500 per semester that can be paid to the school for the students' additional costs that they have for early college. It might go toward fees that the college has. It might also be, if that's all paid for, it could be refunded to the student to help pay for books. Great. And I'm just going to address the elephant in the room here because I get this question all the time when I'm doing this presentation in person. So I'm just going to bring it up. And that is, people will sometimes ask me, I don't think we're going to qualify for anything. Should we apply for Vermont grant? Should we even file the FAFSA? And what I would say is this, there's a number of reasons why you want to do that. One, there are some colleges that say, we want you to file the FAFSA, even if you think you won't qualify, because we want you to exhaust all of your funding opportunities before we give out our money. Also, if a student wants to be eligible for a federal student loan, and I'm not a financial advisor, but the federal student loan is probably the best one. We recommend students use those first. In order to be eligible for a federal student loan, you must file a FAFSA. And then the third reason is in case, you think of it as an insurance policy, if something happens or if you have special circumstances, having that FAFSA on file means you can have a conversation with the financial aid office at the college to see if you might be eligible for more money. So, my son was in school during COVID. And so a lot of people had changes to their financial situations, and having that FAFSA on file meant you didn't have to start from scratch. You could have that conversation right away with the financial aid office, as well as with the Vermont grant program at VSAC, and say, these are our circumstances. It's not the same as when we filed our FAFSA. Can we get some additional help? That's really helpful to have those forms filed. So I recommend, doing it just to get it done. And the first year is probably your hardest year. Successive years are much, much easier.
Carrie, one more question for you, which I imagine you may address, but the question is, do both parents have to submit information? What happens when one parent refuses to participate?
So the FAFSA, whose information is required on the FAFSA? Actually, I'm going to move to the next slide because we talked a little bit about this here. But the whole determining financial need and how it's determined. So an EFC is that expected family contribution, and it's a starting point. It's not what the family has to pay. So what the FAFSA asks for is parent and student income, assets, family size, number of family members in college, and the age of the older parent. Whose information is on the FAFSA? If the parents, biological or adoptive parents, live together, it is both parents' information on the FAFSA regardless of marital status. If the parents are separated or divorced, it's the student the parent lived with, or it's the parent the student lived with, the parent the student lived with the most in the last year. That parent's information goes on the FAFSA. So the person who's not participating may not need to if they are not that parent. But if the parent has remarried, it is the parent and step parent who have to report their information on the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. For the CSS profile, it depends on the college, but many colleges who use the CSS profile have a non-custodial parent form. And so both parents report their information for the CSS profile. They have separate forms for the parents to fill out. I hope that answered the question. All right. So I'm going to move on. This EFC figure, right? They look at that information but the EFC is not necessarily what families have to pay. It's the starting point to determine financial aid. And so in this example, we've got a student who's applied to 3 different Vermont schools. And you'll notice that the first thing that builds in is that expected parent contribution. But then there's also, some Vermont grant money here, a direct loan for the student, there's college financial aid, but at each of these colleges, there's a remaining need or gap that the student has to fill. And so in each of these cases, the family's really responsible for that EFC as well as the unmet financial need. We have an award letter comparison tool that's available on our website. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and you can actually compare the costs and bring it down to what do we still have to come up with? And so the difference between the cost of attendance and financial aid, and also for this remaining need, that gap, in some cases, this is where scholarships can really come into play. As for the institutions we're using on this example, they could actually help fill in that remaining need gap. And so this is the role that exterior scholarships or outside scholarships can play in this process. And I wanted to mention, sometimes a more expensive college can offer a better financial aid package due to larger endowments, but not always. So using that net price calculator really gives you the opportunity to hone in on that and to help this not be a surprise when the College Financial Aid Award comes out. That usually happens late in the winter, early in the spring of the student's senior year. All right. So let's talk about maximizing financial aid. Like, how do you get the most that you possibly can? And ultimately, your academic performance, it has an impact on merit-based aid. So take advantage of any opportunities that you can. You don't have to be the valedictorian to qualify for merit-based aid. My son was a B plus student, and he got scholarship money, merit money, to go to the college he ended up ultimately choosing. You want to consider applying to a college or two where you're kind of considered the high end of the college admission demographic, because those colleges might be willing to spend a little bit more money to get an excellent student like yourself. These big name schools that have thousands of applicants and do not need to work to get more applications, they don't necessarily have to work harder to close the deal. And so they might not have additional funds the way colleges who might be working harder for your student would. And this is really where we talk about, go where you're wanted, if you will. I wanted to mention the FAFSA is really a just the facts document. The Vermont grant application is a just the facts document. So if your family has any extenuating circumstances that aren't being collected or shown on those forms, you want to communicate about those with the college financial aid offices, as well as the Vermont grant program at VSAC. And when you can, use dollar amounts, because I think that that's really helpful. And don't just research for those scholarships, boy, apply for them. We're going to talk about VSAC scholarships during the scholarship presentation, but students can apply for VSAC scholarships using one unified scholarship application and the student's My VSAC account. So go for it, like keep applying, go get your money is what I say to the students that I work with. And then let's talk about some ways to reduce costs. Like look further, for instance, other states, Canada, in addition to in-state lower cost options, dual enrollment, early college, advanced placement. I'm going to put those all into one bucket and say, whenever you have the opportunity to earn college credits, and of course, this research is part of the research you'll do around colleges and universities, is what kind of college credits will you accept? Because if you can reduce the amount of time that you're in school, that is real money. When we are talking about, a $40,000 school, and you can reduce that by a semester, there's $20,000 you saved, right? By doing early college, by doing dual enrollment, by doing advanced placement. If you can cut a year off that, bonus, right? So additionally, I wanted to talk a little bit about NEBI. NEBI is short for the New England Board of Higher Education, and they have a New England Regional Student Program. That program, if we don't offer a major at a state school in Vermont, you can take that major at a state-supported New England university or college at a reduced rate of tuition. The NIBI program also has some colleges that say, the major doesn't even matter. Like if you come from Vermont, we're going to give you the NEBI rate. And the NEBI rate is basically not full out-of-state tuition, but somewhere in between in and out-of-state tuition. So you can save a significant amount of money with this program. The whole start at a school that costs less and then transfer, of course, involves planning and communication with ultimately the college you want to end up at so that you don't have to spend additional time in college. Consider attending local. Not all students do this. They can't. They don't have a local college. But room and board can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 a year. And so that could mean significant savings for a student who chooses to do that. And finally, consider service. I just want to mention two programs. AmeriCorps is sponsored by the Corporation for National and Community Service. And this might be a post-high school gap year experience or something a student does after they graduate from college. But in addition to a living stipend, students who serve receive a post-service education benefit that they can use toward paying for college or toward paying down their student loans. And then additionally, there is the Vermont National Guard Tuition Benefit Program. So if you are not familiar with that, we have more information on our website. But basically, you can get 1 year of free tuition at a Vermont State College or UVM in exchange for 2 years of service in the Vermont Air or Army Guard. And you can do that concurrently. You can be in school and be serving at the same time. For private colleges, that actually works out to equivalent to the tuition at one of the Vermont state colleges, but they can also use that for private colleges in Vermont too. So when we talk about ways to pay, just using the broadest brushstroke, we talk about three buckets of money: past income, present income, and future income. So past income is really savings. Present income are things you can do within the current school year. So doing payment plans, where you break down your payments into 10 repayments over the course of the school year. Using tax credits or scholarships could be considered present income. Future income is borrowing. And so many families will use all three of these buckets in order to help pay for education costs. But if you don't have the ability of any one of these things, then you have to rely on the others. So for instance, if you have no savings, you have to really heavily rely on present and future income. If you don't have any borrowing ability, you really have to find an institution where you can rely on your savings and present income in order to pay for it. So it's really important to keep in mind that these are really the ways that families will choose to help pay for college. So let's talk a little bit about savings. You know, they say this thing, the more you save, the less you have to borrow. And I talk to families all the time who are like, we haven't saved, we don't save, we don't have the ability to save. Every dollar you can save now is money that you don't have to borrow. It may feel like, what's, you know, $100, $1,000 when college costs so much money. Trust me when I say being able to use savings is so much better than borrowing if you can do it. And think about what you can add to your savings before you need to borrow for college. So what sorts of things can you set aside in your income? Where can you save money? And how much can students add to their savings through gifts or summer employment? And how much are students contributing to this? You know, are they going to come to college with their books and personal expenses money saved? That might be a way to, you know, help pay for college instead of having to borrow more. I just want to say it is a myth, and it's a common myth that savings hurts, that parents' savings hurts in the financial aid process. In the EFC calculation, parents' assets are considered at a rate of like 6 to 8%. And so to use dollars for that, $25,000 of parental savings might impact a family contribution by anywhere from $1,700 to $2,000. I'll say that again. $25,000 in parent savings could impact your family contribution by $1,700 to $2,000. You'd probably much rather have that $25,000 and pay $2,000 to $3,000 out of it than rather not have any. But I sometimes hear families say, well, you know, I have some money saved. Should I buy a new car? Should I put a new roof on the house? And my question is usually, is your roof leaking?
Carrie, there was also a question which I answered to some degree, but about 529 savings. So how is that, this kind of savings you're talking about, is that something different?
Sure, 529 savings plans really come in here. And when parents fill out a FAFSA, they report the 529 savings plans under investments, but it's looked at as a parental asset. So it is protected more in the financial aid calculation than as a student asset. Student assets are looked at about 20%. So 20% of a student's savings is expected to go toward college in any given year. So it is protected more as a parent asset. You know, the thinking is that dependent students, their savings goal should be college right now. Whereas for parents, they have other things they should be saving for, which is why they protect that more. And so let's talk a little bit about loans. There are federal loans for dependent students, and there are limits on that. Many students will see that on their financial aid notification from the colleges. But the first year of college, the maximum is $5,500, second year, $6,500, junior and senior year, $7,500. For students who are considered independent students, so adult students, they can borrow an additional $4,000 the freshman and sophomore year, and they can borrow an additional $5,000 the junior and senior year. So there's different levels of funding depending on whether a student is dependent or independent. Most high school students are dependent in this process. There is a list on the federal student aid website on who is dependent and independent in this process. It's a series of questions, and if you answer all no's, then the student is considered a dependent student. If any yes answers, they're considered an independent student. For the cumulative borrowed, I should mention that for dependent students, the maximum borrowed is $31,000. So if a student needs a 5th year of college for some reason, they might run out of federal loan eligibility. And let's talk a little bit about student loan options. We recommend that students accept the federal loans first. They tend to be the best deal for students. They don't have a cosigner requirement. Basically, the government's your cosigner. And the interest rate is set each July 1 for the upcoming school year. So students will apply for loans when they file their FAFSA, and they are applying for loans for each year that they're in school. You don't borrow your 4 years worth of loans up front. You borrow each year for the next following school year. So the interest rates are listed for 2021, 2022. We do not have an interest rate for 22, 23 yet. So the current high school seniors don't know what that's going to be. But they set that rate, and then students borrow. For non-federal loans, VSAC is a lender of non-federal loans. We have the Vermont Advantage Student Loan. That is a fixed rate. Some of these additional non-federal loans have a fixed or variable rate, so it's important to look into that when you're thinking about borrowing. Our interest rates are based on when students begin repayment. So if you begin repayment of the loan right away, it's a 3.79%. If you begin repaying on interest right away, it's 5.2%. And if the student is waiting until they're done with school to begin repaying, that is 6.1%. Worth it to check these out each year for borrowing options, but federal loans should be first. Additionally, there are parent loan options. There's this thing called a plus loan that some colleges will put on their financial aid award letter that is a federal loan for parents. You want to compare that loan. You can see the interest rate right now for the current school year is 6.28%. VSAC has a non-federal parent loan, the Vermont Advantage parent loan, and that has a fixed rate, again, based on when you begin repayment, whether you begin repaying right away or whether you have a delay to beginning repayment. Again, compare those loans. Colleges will award a federal, some colleges will award a federal plus loan, and the only limit to the federal plus loan is the cost of the college minus the financial aid offered. And so parents will sometimes say to me, oh yes, I've been awarded a $20,000 plus loan. And really the only person who can say what the limits are to that plus loan is the parent. Like, can you afford that? And you have to think about that, not only for 1 year, but if the student's in a 4-year program, can you do that over 4 years? Do you have other kids in college? So it's important to think about with that plus loan. The plus loan, the colleges do not look at your ability to pay when they award that. It is really the parents who make the decision about whether or not to borrow it. And so let's talk a little bit about calculators, because these are really helpful. The Federal Student Aid Estimator has both an EFC and federal aid estimates on it. College Board has a financial aid tool and calculator. They have an EFC calculator, and they also have a parent debt calculator. And so parents can put in information about their income, their housing costs, their current debt load, and it will tell them how much they think a parent could potentially borrow in a plus loan or in another loan, thinking about that. Mapping Your Future has a really great student loan debt to salary wizard, and I have used that with students before to look at, okay, if we're going to borrow this amount of money, how much do you need to be making in order to sustain and be able to pay off that student loan debt? Really important stuff. So these calculators are available on our website and are on our handouts. Beagle, any questions?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions about savings. Do you want to take those now or save them to the end?
Where are we for time? You know what? I just have a couple slides left, so let's hold on to those for the end if that's okay.
Great.
Okay, so let's talk next steps for the junior year, right? What should juniors be doing right now? So online college searches, many juniors are doing this already. Using that college scorecard to gather net price information, using college net price calculators for specific net price information. I should mention, using a net price calculator does not guarantee that financial aid, and it does not guarantee that the student will get into that college. It's just students with these stats got this kind of money. So for instance, the example I use is I went on to an Ivy League school website and put in my son's information. They would give us a really decent financial aid package, but my son was not an appropriate student for those schools. So that he probably wouldn't have gotten in admissions wise. So just know that as you're using these net price calculators, you want to have family discussions about choosing and paying for college. We talk about the new safety school being a financial safety school. And so think about that. But when choosing that safety school, it's got to be a school that the student really will entertain attending, not, well, it's my safety school, but I'll never go there. Students want to research scholarships just to get an idea for what's out there. And also think about creating that free college and scholarship appropriate email address for financial aid forms for later. And then next steps for the senior year, you got to research those forms and deadlines required by colleges. Really important to meet the earliest deadline. There's no penalty for applying early, but if you apply late and you only are going to be able to be considered for what's left, that is a problem. Create the federal financial aid accounts, the FSA ID, one for the student, one for the parent if the parent doesn't already have one. The student needs to create a My VSAC account. You want to gather up that family financial aid information in order to file applications. So what are they looking for? You can look at some of the forms and see what they're asking about as far as assets and things like that. You need to file the FAFSA Vermont grant applications for the senior year. For that early college student, I would maybe do that sometime this spring if they're going to early college in the fall. File VSAC's Unified Scholarship application. That deadline tends to be in February. So for current high school juniors, we're looking at that deadline being during February of their senior year. So February of 2023 is the deadline for that. And then also look at and apply for other scholarships. Scholarships requires a little bit of tenacity because there's a lot of scholarships that students can be applying for, and they want to keep at that process. And finally, I wanted to mention, of course, VSAC resources. We have a Paying for College page on our website. We also have a financial aid videos page on our website. And the College and Career Pathways workshop resources are on our website and active right now. And then there's tons of help for financial aid. When you are in the senior year, there's a FAFSA 1-800 number, and they're open, weekends and non-traditional working hours. And also for FAFSA and the Vermont grant, there's a number you can call at VSAC. And online FAFSA, you can chat while filling out an application. There's a brand new chat bot called Aiden. He's the cutest little owl you've ever seen. And you can get some information there. VSAC has financial aid videos that I mentioned. We'll be doing FAFSA Fridays next year, and we did them this year too, where you can schedule one-on-one Zoom meetings to file financial aid forms from October through January. And VSAC shows you how events. We just had one recently that's how to read a financial aid award letter. And we will have them in the fall. That's how you file your FAFSA, how do you file your Vermont grant application, how do you file for VSAC scholarships. So lots of information available. Stay tuned. So Beagle, let's talk about questions.
All right, the first question we have here is, do you have to use any 529 savings the first year, or does it get spread out?
That's a great question. Do you have to use the 529 savings right away, or do you spread it out? I think that's really a family's choice, what they're going to do. So sometimes people say to me, well, if I spend all the 529 money the first year, right, that'll mean I'm eligible for more financial aid. Well, not necessarily. So if you spend all the 529 money the first year, you need to have a plan for successive years if you don't have those funds. So families can use it spread out. Families can use it as they need it. Families can use it right away. It's really the family's choice as to what they're going to do for that. I think when you're planning longer term, you need to think about how we meet our costs every year. But there may be other things coming through, like if the parents get an education tax credit, like they could use that. If parents get some kind of refund, they could use that. If the student gets a scholarship, the student can use that. So it's really kind of looking at your situation and deciding what's best for you.
Okay, next question is about earnings that a student might make. So if they make $5,000 per year, should we encourage her to save it, buy a car, or invest in a 529? So I'm assuming that means how does it affect financial aid?
Sure. How does it affect financial aid? That's a great question. I think for the FAFSA, they protect, for a dependent student, they protect usually, I think this year was about the first $6,000 in earnings. And then if they're earning more than that, they're looking at half of those earnings to be used toward college expenses. So if a student is working and they earn about $5,000, they can certainly put it in a 529. If the student has a 529, it's looked at as a parent asset in the financial aid calculation. If the student has it in their own savings account, 20% of that impacts their family contribution. So, sometimes that's why we talk about summer earnings and gifts from high school graduation, because that money wasn't collected on the FAFSA that was filed the October previous. And so the student has the summer earnings and they have graduation gifts that never gets reported on a FAFSA, and they can use that toward college in the fall. So in that case, that income doesn't get reported for a while. I should mention the way the FAFSA works, and I didn't say that initially, but they're looking at what's called prior year income. So for the class of 2023, they are asking about parents and students' 2021 income. So they're asking about the taxes that are just being filed right now on that FAFSA that they're going to file in October. So, if a student's working right now and they're making that's not going to show up for another year on their FAFSA. I hope that wasn't too confusing.
Right. Next question is, do you have any tips or suggestion when working with colleges to negotiate merit aid or non-need-based aid, things to avoid and things to be sure we do?
Oh, great question. I think that, when I talk to families about negotiating with a college and talking with them, first things first, you never know until you ask, right? If you don't ask, the answer 100% of the time is going to be zero. So it's worth it to ask. Sometimes it is worth it to ask with comparing, to be able to say, this is my first choice college, but my third choice college offered us some much better deal. Is there any chance you could come closer? That might be a suggestion. Any special circumstances, bring those up. Anything that's impacting, your financial situation, grandparent moved into the house or something like that, be sure to communicate that with the college. I would certainly not talk about it as negotiating or haggling. What you would probably do is send an appeal to the financial aid office.
Right. So skip around a little bit here. What is the education tax credit you mentioned?
So on the federal taxes, there is this thing called an education tax credit. And oh my gosh, I am not a tax advisor, nor do I play one on TV. So I need to be certain to say that. But some people could be qualified for an education tax credit for money that gets paid toward a student's college costs. And I believe it's the IRS publication 970, if I'm going to quote, like where you can find more information about that. But also, if you have a tax advisor, check with them about that.
Unmute here. So next one is, what if 2021 was an unusual income year for the family? Does that have to be your base income year for financial aid if your 2022 income is considerably lower?
Right. So that is exactly why when you have special circumstances, you get in touch with the financial aid office. So, 2021, it was an awesome year. 2022 is not. And so you still have to file the FAFSA with 2021 information for the 2022, 2024 FAFSA. Oh my gosh, the years, folks. So you use 2021 income on the 2023, 2024 FAFSA. if 2022 is looking really different, that is when you get in touch with those financial aid offices. And by the time you're applying for financial aid, it's October, November of 2022. So you could be in touch with them and you could say, yes, this is really different. So far we've earned, right? You can say, so far at this point, like this is how different it is. And then the colleges can decide what they're going to do with that information if they need any additional information from you for that. But they can use that to consider the student for their need-based financial aid.
More minutes here. So this is a good question. Are family resources like home value and retirement savings part of the FAFSA and CSS profile calculations?
Oh,
Home value and retirement savings.
okay. So for the FAFSA, the parent's primary home and retirement savings do not get taken into consideration as an asset. They are not considered. As a matter of fact, on the FAFSA, it says do not include these things. On the CSS profile, they will ask about the family primary home, value and debt. They may even ask when the property was purchased and what the purchase price was. So they're going to ask a lot more information about the family's primary home. They will also ask about, are there like how do the parents plan on paying for retirement? Do they have a state-sponsored plan? Do they have a 401k? Or are they just going to use Social Security? So there are things to check off on the CSS profile. So the CSS profile is asking for a bunch more information. The FAFSA does not.
Okay, maybe one more. So question about 529 accounts. If a grandparent started an account, can they move it to other cousins' names who aren't in college yet while one applies for college? So it sounds like the question is, can you transfer who gets the money for a 529 account?
Right. The owner of a 529 account can actually change their beneficiary at any time, is my understanding. So that's possible. A grandparent 529 account does not show up on the FAFSA. It's only if the parents or the student own the 529 account. So if a grandparent owns it, it does not show up on the FAFSA. The CSS profile is going to be a different animal entirely because they will ask, are other people holding money for you? And that's going to have to be reported there. And I just have to say, these are excellent questions. You guys are on fire today.
Yeah, that was it. The only question was, can you just remind me what the CSS profile is again?
Sure. The CSS profile is an extra financial aid application. So the FAFSA Vermont grant application, those are free applications. Those are applications for federal and state aid. The CSS profile is specific to college financial aid and only some colleges. If you Google search CSS participating schools, you will be brought to a list that the College Scholarship Service puts out that says, these are the colleges that use the CSS profile. And you can be able to see who uses it and under what circumstances, because some only use them for international students, some use them for everybody. Some require a non-custodial form if there's a non-custodial parent. So all of that information is on that website, and you can find that information there. So the CSS profile is very specific. Not all families have to fill it out. And some you have to fill it out the first year and you never have to fill it out again. And some the CSS profile is required every year that the student's in college. So it's really, your mileage may vary, but definitely worth looking into as you're researching what's required as part of this process.
Looks like we're at time.
All right. I want to thank you all for attending, and best wishes as you continue the day. You'll probably be asked to fill out an evaluation. Please give us feedback. We've been doing this program for a number of years, and I have to say that your feedback helps us make this program better each year. So thank you very much for attending, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day.